October 14, 1943, 10:08 a.m. over Schweinfurt, Germany. Cold air tears across the sky at 26,000 feet. The engines roar without pause. 4 Wright Cyclone engines on each bomber hammer the air, steady and loud. Black flak bursts open like sudden fists. The sky shakes. A B-17 shudders as metal fragments tear through its left wing. Oxygen masks snap tight over faces. Gunners grip their weapons harder. The smell of oil and cordite fills the cramped fuselage. German fighters slash in from the sun. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s dive fast. Machine guns open fire. Tracers streak past cockpit glass. A top turret swings. Twin .50 caliber guns bark. Brass shells bounce across the floor. A bull turret gunner curls into his sphere, eyes wide, tracking a closing fighter. One bomber drops out of formation, smoke pouring from an engine, parachutes bloom below. Another bomber keeps flying with its nose shattered, its pilot bleeding, its control cables damaged. Still it holds position. The formation pushes on. Bomb bay doors open. Bombs fall toward factories far below. Fighters keep coming. Flak keeps bursting. Crews keep firing. This moment feels final to the men inside the aircraft. But it is only one chapter in a story far larger than this sky. If you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe, like, and share. The Boeing B-17 was born from a problem the United States Army Air Corps could not ignore. In the early 1930s, American planners believed future wars would be decided by air power. They needed a bomber that could fly far, carry heavy bombs, and defend itself deep over enemy territory. In 1934, the Army issued a request for a multi-engine bomber with long range and high-altitude performance. Boeing answered with a sleek prototype. The Model 299, the aircraft first flew in July 1935. It was fast for its size, reaching over 250 miles per hour. It could climb higher than most fighters of its day. Most important, it carried multiple machine gun positions covering nearly every direction. A reporter watching the test flight called it a flying fortress. The name stuck. The early B-17 carried a crew of 10, pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, and gunners placed in the nose, top, belly, waist, and tail. Later versions mounted up to 13.50 caliber machine guns. Each gun fired heavy rounds effective out to more than 1,000 yards. The bomber could carry up to 8,000 pounds of bombs on shorter missions. On long-range missions into Germany, the load was lower, often 4,000 to 5,000 pounds. Cruising altitude was typically between 22 and 28,000 feet. This put it above most anti-aircraft guns early in the war and beyond the comfortable reach of many fighters. American doctrine believed massed formations of these bombers could defend themselves without fighter escorts. Tight formations allowed overlapping fields of fire. Every bomber protected the others. It was a bold idea. It would soon be tested under fire. The first combat deployments revealed harsh truths. Early B-17 crews lacked experience. Training hours were limited. Many gunners had fired only a few hundred practice rounds before combat. Formation flying at high altitude was harder than expected. Weather over Europe was brutal. Clouds hid targets. Ice formed on wings. Engines failed without warning. In 1942, losses mounted. Bombers flying over France and the Low Countries faced fighters attacking head-on. German pilots learned that the nose of early B-17 models was weakly armed. Crews reported sudden attacks with little warning. One after-action report stated, enemy fighters approached from 12 o'clock. Fire ineffective, losses heavy. There were mechanical problems too. Turbo superchargers failed. Oxygen systems leaked. Bull turrets jammed. In some units, only half the aircraft sent out returned fully operational. German pilots mocked the idea of unescorted bombers. One Luftwaffe intelligence summary noted, American bombers rely too much on defensive fire. They are slow and predictable. Fighter units developed new tactics. Rocket attacks, heavy cannon fire, head-on passes to minimize exposure. Loss rates rose sharply in late 1942 and early 1943. On some missions, 10% of bombers failed to return. Crew spoke quietly before takeoff. We might not make it back today, the Flying Fortress had promised, but many doubted it could survive sustained combat over Germany. Survival improved as crews learned hard lessons. Gunners trained longer. Thousands of rounds fired in practice. Crews studied attack patterns. They learned to track fighters earlier and lead targets correctly. Formation discipline tightened. Bombers flew closer together, sometimes only a few dozen feet apart. New variants improved firepower. The B-17F added more guns. The B-17G introduced a chin turret under the nose. This single change reduced head-on attacks significantly. German pilots now faced heavy fire before they could line up a shot. The aircraft itself proved tougher than expected. Its airframe absorbed damage that would destroy lighter bombers. Wings stayed attached even with large sections missing. Engines could be shut down and feathered, allowing flight on 3 or even 2 engines. Crews learned how to manage damage and keep flying. Altitude remained a key advantage. At 25,000 feet, many German fighters struggled with engine performance. Anti-aircraft accuracy dropped with height. Bombers could absorb near misses that would shatter smaller aircraft. Most important was the arrival of long-range escorts later in the war. P-47s and eventually P-51 Mustangs extended protection deep into Germany. Fighters disrupted enemy attacks before they reached bomber formations. Loss rates fell. The Flying Fortress finally operated as intended, as part of a combined system. On August 17, 1943, the first major raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg launched. To bomber forces split their targets. Over 300 B-17s crossed the German border. They faced fierce resistance. More than 300 German fighters rose to meet them. The Regensburg force pressed on. Fighters attacked in waves. One gunner shouted, "Coming in again." Another bomber lost its tail section and fell away. Crews watched without speaking. Bombs hit aircraft factories critical to German fighter production. Losses were heavy. 60 B-17s failed to return that day. But damage to German industry was real. Then came October 14, 1943, the second Schweinfurt raid. Over 290 B-17s flew without full escort. German defenses were ready. Fighters attacked 4 hours. Flak filled the sky. One crew counted more than 100 holes in their aircraft after landing. 60 bombers were lost. Hundreds of airmen were killed or captured. It became known as Black Thursday. Despite the cost, the bombers kept flying. In early 1944, missions struck Berlin itself. On March 6, more than 700 B-17s and B-24s hit the capital. German fighters attacked aggressively. One pilot recalled, "They came straight through the guns. Bombers returned riddled with damage. Some landed with only one engine running." On D-Day, June 6, 1944, B-17s shifted roles. They bombed coastal defenses, rail yards, and troop concentrations. Over 800 flying fortresses flew that morning. Bombs fell ahead of landing beaches. Crews saw the invasion fleet below, stretching to the horizon. In April 1945, a lone B-17 named G. Old Pub returned from Berlin with massive damage. Its nose was torn open. One engine destroyed. Crew wounded, yet it landed safely. Photos spread quickly. The image became proof of the aircraft's toughness. The war ended weeks later. The impact of the B-17 reached far beyond individual missions. More than 12,000 B-17s were built between 1936 and 1945. Factories in Seattle, Wichita, and elsewhere produced aircraft. at an industrial scale. At peak production, one B-17 rolled off the line every 90 minutes. Training programs expanded, tens of thousands of pilots and gunners trained across the United States. Fuel consumption was enormous. Each mission burned thousands of gallons per aircraft. Bomb stocks had two-match sortie rates. By 1944, American bomber forces flew thousands of sorties per month. German industry struggled to recover. Fighter production increased, but fuel shortages and pilot losses crippled effectiveness. German air defenses faced constant pressure. Radar stations were bombed. Repair crews worked around the clock. Compared to earlier bombers, the B-17 carried heavier loads over longer distances with greater survival rates. Losses remained high, but replacement capacity outpaced destruction. This imbalance slowly wore down the German war effort from the air. German pilots developed a grim respect for the Flying Fortress. They called it the Wehrmacht, the four-engine aircraft. Diaries mention frustration. They keep coming. We shoot them, and they keep flying. Fighter pilots reported shock at the damage absorbed. One wrote, "I saw a bomber with half a wing missing still holding formation." Ground crews described wreckage that should not have flown. For American crews, fear never vanished. Each mission carried risk. Men joked to hide tension. Others stayed silent. Morale rose when escorts appeared. It fell when losses mounted. Yet crews returned again and again. The sound of multiple engines became a warning across Germany. Civilians looked up in dread. Air raid sirens followed. The psychological weight of constant bombing strained morale on the ground and in the air. Late in the war, the B-17 evolved again. Radar bombing allowed attacks through cloud cover. Improved sights increased accuracy. Armor protection increased in key areas. Crews adapted to new targets like oil refineries and transportation hubs. Some B-17s were converted for search and rescue. Others carried cameras for reconnaissance. A few became drone aircraft packed with explosives, though results were limited. By 1945, the bomber faced less opposition. Fuel shortages grounded German fighters. Flak remained dangerous, but thinner than before. Missions continued until the final weeks of the war. By the end of the conflict, B-17s had dropped more than 600,000 tons of bombs over Europe. Tens of thousands of crew members served aboard them. Losses were heavy, with over 4,000 aircraft destroyed in combat. Yet the aircraft proved its worth. Early doubts gave way to hard respect. A former German fighter pilot later said, "You could hit them again and again. They did not fall." You had to admire that. The Flying Fortress earned its name through endurance, discipline, and the men who flew inside it, leaving a legacy written in aluminum, fire, and survival.